Welcome to the Kansas City Sports History Podcast. My name is Matt Starr, and I'm your host today. Today's a roundtable discussion of the Kansas City Municipal Stadium history. Our guests are Ed Bishop, the public address announcer, the Missouri Comets, the Kansas City Comets, and FCKC Blues, and Kansas City Municipal Stadium historian Brian Holland. Ed and Brian, you have any opening comments for the session today?
I'm going to say it's great to be back. Enjoyed the last one. Looking forward to this one. Brian?
This would be a good day for a ball game at the old ballpark right now.
Yeah.
It's very warm early March.
Yes.
Agreed.
Well, Kansas City's had a long history of ballparks. Going way back to the 1880s, Kansas City's had stadiums and ballparks for the baseball teams. The Antelopes played at Exercise Field at 14th and McGee. The Unions played at Athletic Park at Southwest Boulevard and Summit Street. The Cowboys played at Pastime Park at Southwest Boulevard and Broadway. The Cowboys also played at League Park at Independence Avenue and Lydia. Then the Blues and Monarchs played at Parade Park at 15th and Paseo. Later, the Unions, Cowboys, Monarchs, and Blues all played at Association Park at 20th and Prospect. Then later at Exposition Park at 15th and McGall. Then Gordon and Capel Field were at 48th and Tracy near Brush Creek for the Packers of the Federal League. Then the history begins at 22nd and Brooklyn. On July 3rd, 1923, the ballpark called Muehlebach Field for the Kansas City Blues and Monarchs. The ballpark was just 5 blocks southwest of the Kansas City Blues' previous home, Association Park at 20th and Prospect. Now, it was built in 1923 by the owner George Muehlebach, a single-decked field at an unheard cost of $400,000. The first game had an attendance of 18,000 fans for the Kansas City Blues, who beat the Milwaukee Home Brew 10-7. It is located near the Jazz District, and the stadium often featured performers like Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday. Muehlebach Field was the site of Games 5, 6, and 7 of the Negro League's World Series in 1924. Now, Blues games were segregated, but anybody could sit anywhere at Monarchs games. It had an electric scoreboard. It could seat 16,000 people, not counting the bleachers. Now, Mr. Muehlebach was the owner of the local brewery and the famous Muehlebach Hotel. In 1930, portable lighting was installed at Monarchs games, while permanent lighting was first used on July 6, 1932. Charles Lindbergh even made an appearance on August 17, 1927. One of the greatest moments of the stadium was August 7, 1930, one of the first professional night games ever played. The Homestead Grays, Smokey Joe Williams, and Monarchs Chet Brewer pitched one for the ages, with Brewer striking out 19 and Williams fanning 27, and the Grays win 1-0 in 12 innings.
I was going to go back to the Kansas City Cowboys.
Yeah.
1886, I believe, was their lone year in the National League, as I recall. And the funny thing is, and I heard this since I'm going to soon be a resident of Pittsburgh. After that franchise ceased to exist, in 1887 they became the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Okay.
But they did not take any of the players from the Cowboys. So going way, way back, the Pittsburgh Pirates' origins come from the Kansas City Cowboys. I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
But on Muehlebach Field, the one thing I'll say, when that was built in 1923, when you probably still have the, knowing you, Brian, you still have the article from the Star. It was a frog pond and ash heap, and it was used as a swimming hole by the local children when they built the stadium.
Amazing, yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting that the first night game was played there in 1932, which predated the first night game in Major League history by 3 years.
Yeah.
That was in
Crossley
1935.
Field, Cincinnati, yeah.
Exactly.
Incredible, yeah.
So, and if you ever get a chance to go down to the Negro Leagues Museum, there's a big wall mural of one of the night games that was played down there. I think it was with the portable lights at the time. And it's like one of the little viewing rooms they have down there, and they've got it on the walls of the stadium. And I wish I could have taken a picture of it, but they won't allow photography down there. But and also, Kansas City Cowboys, there was also a football team called the Kansas City Cowboys, the first NFL team.
Wasn't it like 1925?
1925, one season. They played at what was then Muehlebach Field. And the setup was very similar to what the Chiefs had with the temporary bleachers in the outfield. Almost the same setup, only with one deck instead of two on the stadium.
Incredible NFL history in Kansas City, but way before the Chiefs.
And I believe you posted a picture of that within the last couple of weeks, didn't you?
No,
Somebody
I've done
did.
it before. I'll have to find that one again. I've got it in my files there.
It's got like little wooden goalposts, and but it was odd because it looked just like a Chiefs game, except that it was a single deck, and then the bleachers in the outfield were smaller than what they
Right, it
put
wasn't
out
like the
for a Chiefs.
Wolfpack section.
Yeah.
But and that team, if I recall, the Cowboys was a pretty good. They had a pretty good record that year too. But the NFL being what it was, I mean, it was just a different group of teams every year. Teams came and went at the drop of a hat.
Well, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are considered one of the longer tenured teams. I mean, they're the ancients of the NFL. They were not even founded till 1933.
Right.
So kind of like what we, Brian and I have joked before, I think, about indoor soccer. Someday if we live long enough, they'll talk about all these franchises that have come and gone. Mm-hmm. Hopefully if the league ever gets up and gets that popular. But the NFL was very similar to what we go through with some of these soccer leagues back then.
I'm still waiting for an entry in the website Fun While It Lasted on the Kansas City Cowboys. It's a wonderful website of defunct teams from all sports. And the Comets are in there, of course. And he's quoted me a couple of times on that website, too, which is kind of cool. But, yeah, that's another one I wish I could get a little more information on the Cowboys, but unfortunately the microfilms from the Star, they're not the library. They don't have all of them, and I don't think the Star even has all of them, because that's the only two places I know of where you can find the microfilms from the paper. And even then, sports coverage was almost non-existent in the 20s, so finding anything there is tough.
There was a Kansas City Blues NFL team too, a short-lived team before or after the Cowboys as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 1937, the ballpark at 22nd Brooklyn has name changed from Muehlebach Field to Ruppert Stadium for the Blues and Monarchs. Now, when the New York Yankees acquired the Blues in 1937 for their farm team, they renamed Muehlebach Field to Ruppert Stadium after Colonel Jacob Ruppert, the owner of the Yankees at the time. The stadium was called Ruppert Field from 1937 to 1942.
I think it was after his death they renamed it to Blues Stadium or Blues Field after that. But
that was the site of Lou Gehrig's final ball game, I believe, because it was an exhibition game, and he was already in the throes of his illness, and I think he had like one walk and didn't even finish the game. And then right after that, he went to the Mayo Clinic for examination and treatment.
Well, in 1943, the ballpark at 22nd Brooklyn had its name changed from Ruppert Stadium to Blues Stadium. From 1943 to 1954 for the Blues and the Monarchs. Colonel Jacob Ruppert died in 1939, and the stadium was changed to the Blues Stadium in 43. It was home to the American Association Kansas City Blues, the Negro League's Kansas City Monarchs. Now, J. Leslie Wilkinson, the field's first owner, had a portable lighting system to illuminate the field for the night Negro League games. And Jackie Robinson even played for the Monarchs for Blues Stadium briefly in 1945.
Ernie Banks played too there for a brief time.
Mm-hmm.
And again, and of course Mickey Mantle and Elston Howard. He was with the Blues for a while.
Was Yogi Berra with the Blues?
I don't think so.
Because so many of the Yankees
he was
greats,
in the military service, and he was not on the New York Yankees roster, so he was shown as a Kansas City Blues on the roster, but not actually played with the Blues. So.
Okay, and so many, and the point being that so many of the Yankees greats passed through there. You almost think they all did at some point or another on their way to those legendary Yankees teams, and then of course after the A's came to town in '55, the Yankees went from a beloved parent club to an unbeloved parent club of the A's. But that was a wonderful era. And J.O. Wilkinson, to me, guys, was always, I mean, not only is he a visionary with owning the Monarchs and the Negro Leagues, he's the one who got the trucks that they put the portable lighting systems on because he needed them for barnstorming, and then he could just pull them up to Blues Stadium, Muehlebach Field, whatever, and just throw those things up and have the night games. And I always thought the gentleman was an extraordinary visionary. He got past the issues of race. He was a businessman who saw the potential and understood how good a lot of these players were. a tribute to the fact that Jackie Robinson went from the Monarchs to the Brooklyn Dodgers, I think.
Yeah, a lot of Yankee legends, from Phil Rizzuto went on, played in Kansas City and Blue Stadium for a period of time before they got called up to the parent team, or maybe guys had struggled, the Yankees team got sent back to Kansas City of all places, like Mickey Mantle, for a period of time.
Yeah, Mantle only played a handful of games as a Kansas City Blue when he was his documented early struggles, and then when he went back the second time to the parent club, that's when it all kicked in, and the rest is history on that.
Well, then in 1955, the A's moved from Philadelphia to Kansas City at the Stadium in 22nd Brooklyn, which underwent major renovations to make room for the major league team and crowd to come. So the home opener was April 12th, 1955 for the Kansas City A's. Let's talk about Municipal Stadium now, beginning.
Well, the amazing thing to me was the renovation, this short amount of time that it took to get that done. I mean, they had to have worked around the clock, because as soon as the 1954 baseball season ended for the Blues, they immediately tore down basically the whole structure of the stadium except for the foundation. And then you had basically less than 6 months to build the whole thing from the ground up almost. And it was, from all accounts, a very brutal winter that year. It wasn't like this one we're having now. It was the polar opposite of this one. There was a lot of snow, a lot of cold weather that they had to fight with, but they got it's in those photographs of the timeline, so to speak, of the stadium going up is just fascinating. The week from one week to the next to see the progress that they made so quickly, and it's like, and I mean, they were still within 3-4 days of the home opener on April 12th, which I'm surprised they didn't have the A's start maybe a couple weeks later to buy them a little bit more time, because April 12th was like the start of the season for everyone. So the paint was still drying almost literally when the home opener came along, and it snowed the night before the home opener, so it looked like it might not even happen anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
And if you see pictures from opening day, you can see there's still remnants of snow on in the outfield in particular. And it's like, how they managed to pull this off. It ended up being a fairly decent day, for the game. I think it was like in the upper 40s or around 50ish or something when they did open it. But it was just a Herculean effort to get this thing and make it a professional ballpark. Because and it was considered at the time fairly state of the art for such and even though it was kind of a makeshift thing in some ways. But the only major problem at the time was the field. Because we didn't have George Tomah yet.
He didn't.
1957. He didn't. Okay. And if you see any photos or highlights from the first couple years of A's baseball, the field is just dreadful.
It reminds me of my Raytown Little League fields I used to play on here locally. But the thing is, they often refer to Municipal Stadium as the 90-day miracle. And if anyone listening out there, if you can find any books on Charlie O. Finley, read them, because the people who do the biographies of him, a lot of them go back and do Municipal Stadium, because Charlie always claimed he had issues with it, and they talk about how it got built, how the A's got started, how he acquired them. But it was the 90-day miracle, because the negotiations, actually the book that was written called The Philadelphia, and they scratch out Philadelphia, Kansas City Athletics by Ernie Mell, is the best book that tells the story. But the A's were purchased in November. There was a lot of negotiations with Connie Mack through November, so they didn't start work really on the stadium. I mean, finally the American League, I believe, in end of November, early December of 1954 finally said yes, you can move, and that's when all the funding, everything got freed up, and they said go.
That's amazing. It happened that quick.
It happened that quick.
There was a lot of finagling. I think they had the A's ownership had to do a lot of cajoling with like the Detroit owner to get his vote, because it was a majority vote amongst the other American League owners. And I think Mr. Briggs in Detroit was balking at it at first, and then they finally sweet talked him into it. And then even the Mack family was getting offers from local businesses and car dealers in Philadelphia. And Charlie Finley tried to join in with one of those groups. And the day the team was sold to Arnold Johnson, Finley thought he'd be cute and show up 10 or 15 minutes early.
Well, Arnold Johnson showed up like 90 minutes early
Okay.
and already had the deal in the bag by the time Finley showed up. So he wanted a team as far back as that. Arnold Johnson beat him to it. The stadium was getting built, and when Brian was saying they took it down to the rails, he wasn't kidding. And what they found, and the reason that it was really a miracle, the footings that were poured in the 20s and 30s, in the 1920s, were only poured to support one deck.
Okay.
They had to tear out all the footings for Municipal Stadium and re-pour them to support a second deck,
Yeah.
as well as. So you kind of had to go take it down beyond the wood, as the old saying goes, and start over.
That's an amazing construction feat to do that quick.
And they developed the conveyor belts for the seats while building that stadium. If you watch some of those construction photos where the crane goes along, you'll see conveyor belts. They developed that on the fly because they knew they weren't going to make opening day, and they had conveyor belts that would ship those wooden seats into the upper deck so they could just go bang, 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 and throw them.
Yeah, they were already putting the seats in the sections that were completed, and then you go around the rest of the ball diamond, and there's nothing there. So it was just a piece, section by section kind of deal. And of course, they lucked out. It was one of the rare times a major construction project in Kansas City wasn't interrupted by a strike.
Yeah, that's true.
Like Kemper Arena and the sports
or
complex,
Orange Barrels
and so
or
forth.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, they somehow managed to avoid that, and because that would have been disastrous if they had any kind of strike. I think,
Which is the reason the Royals played the '72 season at Municipal Stadium.
Correct.
Was because of the strike.
right.
This really put Kansas City on the map as far as a major league city, first major league city team we had, and so it's an incredible situation in '55.
Well, when the A's came to town, they got a parade reminiscent of a World Championship parade with floats. There's a big elephant on the baseball and a big A, and I think they went right down Grand. I think. Just like the Royals did when they won the '85 World Series, because this was huge for this city.
And it's easy to forget now. At that time, Kansas City was the westernmost outpost in Major League Baseball.
That's amazing.
For 3 years.
Think about that. That's incredible.
Until the Dodgers and Giants moved to California, this was as far west as Major League Baseball went.
Yeah.
St. Louis had been it up until that point, and Milwaukee, really. St. Louis, Milwaukee, Chicago was the outer perimeter of where Major League Baseball existed.
And the A's drew extremely well that first season, and I believe they finished second in the American League. I'd have to look that one up, second or third, but they drew well over 1 million fans, which was for a last place team, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But it was it was the novelty factor, and it's hey, we're a big league now, and their first season wasn't all that terrible compared to some of the later ones as far as on the field, but it was just kind of a magical time, and everybody was excited about it. It's a shame they couldn't have built on that momentum, but
Right. Seating capacity was 17,476 for Muehlebach, increased to 30,296 and 55 for the A's. So big change for that. And football had a seating capacity of 47,000.
Well, and if you look at Municipal Stadium now, one of Charlie Finley's complaints when he wanted to move the club is when the Yankees come to town, I can draw 50,000 plus. And he was trying to use that as a lever to get a new stadium. If you look at the trend now, the K's been reduced a little under 40 to about 38, 39,000. Pittsburgh, I think, is 37, 38. The new ballpark in Oakland, they're talking 35. The trend in the modern era is to reduce the size of the ballpark and charge more for tickets and get more money out of the patrons. And then you have less, to cover with ushers, security, etc., and you create more demand by reducing the supply. And I think they just didn't know how to leverage that back in the day.
The term I've heard bandied about on that is boutique ballparks.
That's it. Yeah,
because there was talk of that when they were trying to get a stadium downtown to replace Kauffman, and it was going to be like near Crown Center, and it was only going to hold like 27,000 or something like that. And it's like this, no.
And that would be unfair to a lot of the fans. And there was also another proposal when they were going to replace the K to put one on the north end of downtown.
Right.
And at the time, I worked in the AT&T building at 9th and Oak, and if you've been down there, it's a nightmare. One-way streets. There's no land, no infrastructure. It would have been a costly nightmare. But if you think back when Muehlebach Field was built, it was in 1923 what the Truman Sports Complex was in terms of suburbia.
Yeah, amazing how it's all
because it was
changed.
the edge of town because not everybody had cars.
Right.
And interestingly enough, my parents, when they moved to town in 1957, They lived straight down the street on Brooklyn at 41st in Brooklyn, and would take the trolley car up to the ball games.
Yeah.
And so they never had to drive, and it was perfect.
It's amazing, yeah.
And they lived in St. Louis. My mom's from the St. Louis area, and when they got married, they did the same thing there and went to Browns games and Cardinals games at Old Sportsman's Park, which is another fun old venue. Another thing too to remember also, when Municipal Stadium opened, or when it was rechristened Municipal Stadium, we imported the scoreboard from Braves Field in Boston.
Yeah.
Which, instead of building a new one, they said, "Oh, we'll just take this one," and they trucked it in. I don't know how many trucks it took, and it was a quirky old scoreboard anyway. It listed the strikes ahead of the balls, so it would say 2-3-0. Strike 2, ball 3, no outs in the upper left. And another quirk I've noticed too is for baseball, they would always list the home team on the bottom, which is the normal way to do it. But when the Chiefs played there, the Chiefs were always on the top row on the line score.
I did not know that.
Amazing, yeah.
Every time I've seen the picture of the scoreboard, the Chiefs are always on the top. I don't know why they did it that way. And
like baseball, though.
and in the first season when the Chiefs came to town, they weren't allowed to use the big scoreboard. And I think
Phantogram, because Charlie Finley was very upset. He was paying $125,000 a year in rent at that point, and they made a deal with the Chiefs to pay $1 in rent. And Charlie had paid for the Phantogram. He had paid for the mercury vapor lighting every 50 feet around. He had done the citrus painting on the box seats. He put, I believe it was between $400,000 and $500,000 in his own improvements in the stadium. And he was very upset that the city had not paid him back for that, and then allowed the Chiefs in for $1 a year.
Wow, yeah.
The city later offered him that deal, but the insult had already been made. So the Chiefs had to put up, I think, Brian, they had like a little scoreboard beyond the left field wall.
Right, it was right behind the goalpost in the east end zone. Just a little, almost like a hand-me-down
like a
scoreboard.
Daktronics hand-me-down basketball.
Yeah, it looked like something out of a high school stadium,
Yeah.
and that was the main game clock. And also on the main scoreboard, well, the Phantogram came later after they brought the main scoreboard from Boston.
Right.
It was a separate. That was new.
It was attached to the right side of the scoreboard.
And it was just a very
messages,
very very basic. And they couldn't like Camp and Eris, you couldn't even spell all the words because you only had X number. So it was always
dots.
So it was always campy, or they would put an apostrophe in the middle of the name or something. But anyway, during that '63 Chiefs season, the main scoreboard still said White Sox and A's. They never even took the letters off the scoreboard.
Wow.
Because you had to do that by hand, of course, on that old scoreboard. Yeah. And then the out-of-town scoreboards had all they had to do those by hand, too, the team names.
And it's funny that's all the rage now when you build new ballparks, is if you can put in a hand-operated scoreboard, because that's an attraction for the fans.
Field,
whereas back then it was like, we need this, and we want electronics and Phantogram. It's funny the way trends go. And, of course, nowadays what I like is the way the Cubs have it. Speaking of venerable stadiums, they have the new giant replay boards. You can see the replay, but you still got guys up there with binoculars who are doing the hand thing by hand. I love it when you can have the best of the old and the new.
Yeah.
Right. And also, when I was moonlighting at the Kansas City Star in the late 90s, Bill Richardson, the columnist, he was on a quest to find out whatever happened to the old scoreboard at Municipal Stadium, because it apparently was not demolished with the rest of the ballpark.
Okay.
And he'd been researching. He heard it wound up in some college or something.
Yeah.
Really?
Like in the Ozarks or something. But he never was able to confirm it. I would love to find out what happened to it. I would assume by now somebody would have unearthed it. So I'm thinking it was probably dismantled. But.
We took a tour here a couple summers ago, and Jeff Logan, who is one of the I want to say co-chairs is the best word I'll use for the Kansas City Baseball Historical Society. We met at Arthur Bryant's down the street from where Municipal Stadium used to be, and we all had lunch together. And then for those who could stick around, I took the afternoon off. We drove up, parked, right there on the street where the buses would have parked next to the ballpark. There's now a neighborhood that sits there, obviously, which I'm sure you'll get to in your notes. And we walked onto the site, and he was able to kind of march it off. And he said, home plate would be approximately here, second base here. And he said, 1st base here, 2nd base here, 3rd base here. And he said, 4th base here, 5th base here, 6th base here, 7th base here. And he said, 8th base here, 9th base here, 10th base here, 11th base here, 12th base here, 13th base here, 14th base here, 15th base here, 16th base here, 17th base here, 18th base here, 19th base here, 20th base here, 21st base here, 22nd base here, 23rd base here, 24th base here, 25th base here, 26th base here, 27th base here, 28th base here, 29th base here, 30th base here, 31st base here, 32nd base here, 33rd base here, 34th base here, 35th base here, 36th base here, 37th base here, 38th base here, 39th base here, 40th base here, 41st base here, 42nd base here, 43rd base here, and the Beatles would have been right where that house sits now. We went through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But
Beatles would be in your basement.
he picked up pieces of what looked like shale or rock. And he said he had a friend who was in the salvage business in the 70s who said, we never carted off. No one locally ever carted off the majority of that stadium. The belief of all the salvage companies is that they buried it under the dirt. Everything is down there. And again, stadiums are typically anywhere from 30 to 60 feet, depending on how the slope of your lower deck below street level. Mm-hmm. But if you had like a highly powerful sonogram or x-ray machine, I'll bet you everything but that scoreboard is still down there, because the shale he picked up was like a special type of cut you would have used to build to build some of the amenities of the stadium, the walls, the things that weren't cinder block. Mm-hmm. And they floated to the top.
Yeah.
So the belief is, a lot of the wooden seats got pulled out, and they didn't do, there was no internet to sell them on, so I don't know how they got dispersed.
I have a story about that later.
Oh, yeah, because I'll be, I can't wait to hear that. But other than the seats and the scoreboard and stuff, a lot of that stuff that got torn down just got shoved to the bottom and covered in dirt, is the belief of Jeff and some of his friends in the salvage business.
Amazing. The original cost of the stadium in 1923 was $400,000, and in 1955, $2.5 million, which are all pretty relatively different terms today as far as cost.
The original stadium, I think we could have got together and afforded the mortgage on, but but yeah, you're right. Then $2.5 million would have been a little dicey. And today, if you went to build a park like that or recreate an old time park like that, you're probably still you're probably on $200 to $300 million even for a basic look like that.
That's incredible how things have changed time wise. Yeah. They even had a small children's petting zoo located in foul territory down the left field line, which features pheasants, monkeys, rabbits, and the A's mascot, Charlie Old Mule, was even in the stadium.
I got this interesting story about the monkeys that came out of one of the Finley books. Catfish Hunter and I believe Luke Krause used to take those greenies or amphetamines that the players kept in the clubhouse, and they would shove it down. They'd find a grasshopper in the outfield, and they would shove the amphetamine in the grasshopper's throat and feed it to the monkeys and watch them just lose it in the petting zoo. That was their pregame entertainment. So how many stadiums A have petting zoos and B have monkeys that probably needed counseling after an encounter with the A's pitching staff?
I've seen photos of the little enclosure there, and it was in the left field corner. And there's Charlie O, the mule, and then there's a picnic area right next to it. Now, I bet that smelled real good in the summertime.
Downwind, folks.
Exactly. But quite a unique feature in those days, though, as far as the baseball stadium.
They planted little trees, and they had picnic tables. And
of course, you had the sheep in the right field side. That started, I believe, with opening day in '63. That was another one of Charlie O's little innovations, to have the sheep out there grazing in the outfield.
Well, and Charlie said, hey, look, that hill's too steep to mow, because again, that came straight down from street level to playing surface. So, and then the shepherd had a bell? They ring for home runs?
And I imagine a couple of the sheep got bopped by some home runs in batting practice and so forth.
The T-Bones recreated that a few years ago.
The sheep?
Yes.
They put banners on them, and they had a guy dress up as a shepherd. Chris Brown, the general manager of the T-Bones, has done several tributes to the Kansas City A's and had players out, and I got some autographs there a few years ago. But they did sheep at the game, and I thought, were you there, Brian?
No,
I went to one of them.
Wasn't it retro night, and the T-Bones wore A's uniforms and so forth,
or the hats or whatever they could scrounge up at the time, and they'd sell some of them in their pro shop. But it was great to see the sheep.
They like magazine too, as far as the sheep, and as far as a unique thing like that.
Uniform sheep, they always made it.
And I believe also at that first game in '63, Harry Truman threw out the first ball again, and
great history,
And there's a story about one of the players, the catcher, when he threw out the first ball at the first game in '55, the catcher had him autograph the ball for him, and that he threw out to him. That was pretty special. There was another story. Lou Boudreau was the manager of the A's when they came to town, and he was they for some reason awarded him with a prize steer from the Golden Ox.
Okay.
And he said, "I hope that doesn't become somebody's steaks too soon," or something to that effect.
If the petting zoo had been in effect, then you could have been downwind from that as well.
Oh, yeah.
I guess Charlie Finley had the stadium colors pretty bright in some places. The field seats with citrus yellow, reserve seats, bleachers, desert turquoise, beams yellow, orange, and the foul lines fluorescent pink. So,
Fluorescent pink. He said, I may not have the newest ballpark, but I have the sexiest ballpark. Was his quote.
Wow.
And those orange beams always stood out to me. I mean, that's how I knew it was our ballpark, because Municipal Stadium looked very similar to Milwaukee's County Stadium,
Yes.
and some people have actually confused the two in like game photos and stuff. You have to look for the orange beams, because Milwaukee's were more of a gray, I think. And but the original grandstand at County Stadium was shaped almost identical to ours, only it was a bit rounder, and it stopped about halfway down the left field line. They added onto it later, but they were very similar layouts to begin with. And of course, the County Stadium was built in 1953, so it was the very same era, just a couple years older.
I went there to see the Brewers and the Red Sox play in 1990, and sat right in the front row of the upper deck behind home plate. And to me, it was the closest. To me, it was awesome. I really enjoyed it because it was the closest you could come to recreating the old-time baseball at Municipal Stadium. Because the Municipal was torn down in '76. It had been gone 14 years. So to me, as an adult, to be able to go. And the funny thing is, the Angel Stadium was patterned after both Tiger Stadium and Municipal Stadium, but just done as a concrete updated bowl. And that stadium still stands to this day. And even the K was fashioned, and obviously you have the kind of rounded edges that bevel down in the upper deck, but was also patterned after Municipal Stadium in some regards. It was really, in some ways, it was considered the grandfather of some of the modern stadiums built in the 60s and 70s, because it was not a terrible park. It just after Finley put his money in it and then kept talking about moving, and the Chiefs kept talking about getting a bigger stadium, it just became poorly maintained and allowed to fall
And the
apart.
neighborhood had deteriorated.
And the neighborhood was in terrible shape.
Parking was always an issue, and it was...
Sam's parking.
Yes.
Parking somebody's yard.
Yeah. Well, and the one time I got to go to an A's game when I was a kid, somebody tried to hold us up, and I was 3, and my dad said, "You're too young to run, too young to fight. We're not going back. I can't take you back anyway." So yeah, the neighborhood around there had just gone downhill.
Well, and what they did too, what a lot of people have asked me if there was ever like an expansion plan in mind, because the third base stands, the third base line, the grandstand stopped about halfway down the line, and then there was like the little small bleacher area in the left field corner, and was expansion planned in the future? And I'm thinking maybe it was at one time, and then of course the Truman Sports Complex came along and there was no need to. They could have expanded that on down to the left field corner if they wanted to build a bigger grandstand, but that really wouldn't have helped the Chiefs much, because the Wolfpack bleachers would have obstructed the view.
I remember an article from 1972, and the stadium had been closed. The Royals were getting ready to finish out their final season there. And Kansas City was talking about trying to get the NBA and the NHL, but they needed an arena to do it in beyond Municipal Auditorium if they were going to be in those two leagues. And there were two plans. One was obviously Kemper Arena, which got built after the Kemper family donated that $3 million in land and got a huge tax write-off. I wonder how that happened. The other plan was to take Municipal Stadium and take the overhang and complete a roof over it and turn it into an arena. But it was already beginning to rust. That plan was quickly shot down because what it would have taken to bring it up to standards even then for the NBA and NHL and overcome a lot of the issues and then heat it in the winter. But they're like, because the thought was, well, we have seats, we have a partial overhang roof, let's just fully enclose it and turn it into an arena. And everyone's like, you got no parking, the place is rusting, it's fallen down now because it's not been kept up. And it was determined that it was too great a cost and too little return to do that.
Not feasible.
It wasn't feasible, but I remember seeing the renderings in the start. And I'm 8 years old, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, as a businessman at 8, this doesn't work for me.
And of course, no discussion of Municipal Stadium would be complete without talking about the parking, because often you got to park in somebody's front yard for $1. That's how with the times I went with my folks, my mom usually took me. This was I think my first Royals game was in 1970, and we never parked in Sam's for some reason. We always went and found somebody's front yard, and all you had to do was go through the residential area there, and there was always somebody waving a flag, and park your car here, and you didn't have to worry about your car. They would actually sit and watch the car, and listen. They'd have their radio on, listen to the ball game, and they would watch your vehicle for you, and you didn't have to worry about what you were going to come back to. And the last game I ever went to at Municipal Stadium was August 22nd, 1972. It was Cub Scout night, and my dad took us that night, and me and like 5 other Cub Scouts piled into our big Chevy Biscayne, and we're driving down I-70, and we kept hearing this yowling sound coming from the motor. We pull off on 23rd Street there on I-70. Dad opens up the hood, and there's our cat.
Oh no!
In the motor of the car. On this was back when you had all kinds of elbow room under a hood. So he had this little cubby hole right next to the wheel well that he liked to sleep in. And he was in our, he climbed up there in the garage before we left the house. So he's scared half out of his mind. And we pull up to somebody's house and park the car and explain what happened. And we left the cat in the car with the windows rolled down. Oh, we'll watch him for you, and all was well after that. But that was
and in a way, when the teams left, it was kind of devastating to the neighborhood's local economy, because a lot of those folks had made, because with between Arthur Bryant's and the neighborhood and people being able to charge for parking, that was ancillary income to folks who were already economically disadvantaged that they lost.
Yeah, that was a fairly good chunk of change, night after night.
80 games plus a year of home games.
If you could fit, half a dozen cars in your front yard and
Chiefs games, another 8 games or whatever,
True.
Now, Charlie Finley had the Pennant Porch built in 1964 to ridicule the Yankees' 296-foot short right field fence. The American League later forced Finley to remove the Pennant Porch. What an outstanding change.
So instead, he raised the chain link fence in right field to 40 feet high, so nobody could knock it out onto Brooklyn anymore. He went the other direction.
And of course, this configuration that he came up with on this Pennant Porch had this protrusion that it came at such a severe angle, and then it veered back toward the foul pole, and it's like, an outfielder's going to impale himself on this, chasing down a fly ball.
There was a possibility if you hit one into the right field corner, it would go into this little pizza slice, and an outfielder would have to go around the protrusion and into the corner. So what would normally be perhaps a double could have been a triple or an inside the park home run, because the wall didn't stay to the foul line. It actually came into fair territory to a point. So if the ball took just the right angle, it could get lost in. I would have called that the Bermuda Triangle.
That was just downright dangerous, though, because this thing, like you say, it was shaped like a pizza slice. The right fielder was like in danger. So for that reason alone, that should never.
Well, especially if you're chasing a fly ball and you're into that corner and you're not able to look down and see that. And then it had like a little roof pavilion on top of it, and like 3 to 5 rows of bleachers.
Yeah, small little bleacher section, which looked very rickety too.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it looked like Jerry Jones' thing at the Super Bowl until to get the extra seats.
And that's another topic I've always been fascinated by at the stadium, was the dimensions of the field. Because if you hit a home run at Municipal Stadium, you earned it, because it was so deep, particularly when the Royals played there. It was 369 feet to the left field corner, which is unbelievable today. And then, of course, you had the 421 to dead center, and you had the raised section in center field on the wall, which doubled as the batter's eye.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you hit one out of there, you earned it.
Well, and then I think in the first year there was like either a chain link or a little wall, because the lights sat on the warning track. And so the lights protruded in a little bit, and you had a little thing around them to keep you from running into the tower.
Right.
And then when they reset the wall, they set it in front of the lights later. So the dimensions changed a few times, but you're right. They were always unusually deep, especially to left and center field.
So it was really a pitcher's park in a lot of ways. Although that didn't stop the Yankees from hitting home runs out of there.
Well, the Yankees had left-handed hitters who could hit it onto Brooklyn. But right-handed hitters, to me, it was a death valley.
So the most memorable home run I remember ever seeing there was in '72 when Paul Shaw hit the last grand slam that was ever hit in that stadium, and it just went screaming all the way out of the ballpark. It was a line drive, and it went over the outer wall.
Really? Wow.
Into Sam's
and
lot.
headed for Sam's parking lot.
Amazing. Yeah.
And that was the first grand slam I'd ever seen, and the place just went berserk.
Wow.
It was electric. It was really cool.
Yeah. One of the most incredible features of the stadium was the mechanical rabbit named Harvey, who rose out of the ground with new baseballs for the umpire. What an amazing
And its
feature.
eyes blinked. It was like a possessed devil rabbit.
I always wondered if the Warner Brothers people ever fussed about copyrights, because he sure had a very similar resemblance to Bugs Bunny.
He really did. I thought so too.
I think I remember that being mentioned in a book, and I can't remember if he got a cease and desist on that or not. But the rabbit was moved to Oakland, and the last picture I saw of it was black and white, and the rabbit was beaten 5 ways from Sunday and in great disrepair. So who knows? Like the scoreboard.
Rest in pieces.
Rest in peace, Harvey, because or rest in pieces, yeah. But like the scoreboard, it would be interesting if that were still out there somewhere.
I never got to see Harvey. That was an A's thing, and I never got to see that in person. And of course, we have to talk about the field itself when George Tomah got here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that beautiful intricate checkerboard pattern he would put on. That just blew my mind, still to this day, how pretty that field was, particularly when the Royals played there. And anytime I can find a good color photograph of that field, I like to share it, because it was just amazing the time and effort that he put into it. And you would watch. I loved watching the pregame when they would prep the field, when they would drag the infield and paint the lines and everything. And it was like a big operation. It's not as fun today, because they do it a little differently now. And if I remember right, I don't know. I want to say the Royals did this in the early '70s, and some other teams did it too. When they would drag the infield in the middle of the game, they would have it. It would be like a race to see how fast they could do it, and if they could beat the record time of 26 seconds or something like that. And I always wanted to drag the infield. I always thought that would be fun.
Yeah, there's a person who comes to the Baseball Historical Society meetings who used to work on George Tomah's crew. He's disabled now and in a wheelchair, but he looks upon those as the fond days. Charlie Finley would give George Tomah money. They didn't make much to be on that grounds crew. A lot of the local kids, and Finley would give Tomah money to take him down to Arthur Bryant's and buy him dinner. But those kids worked hard. Tomah was often there till the middle of the night. And what it obviously was, like we said, it was not always the greatest neighborhood, but George was. Sometimes he took Hank Stram's kids home. Stram's kids Hank would forget to take his kids home once in a while, and George would be there till the middle of the night and like, oh, well, I better take you back to your dad's house. But George worked till the middle of the night. They didn't have the drainage systems they do today, so in the spring when the heavy rains would come, they would rent a helicopter, and they would come in and perch that helicopter, like 30, 50 feet off the ground, let the rotating blades help dry the field, because they hadn't developed the technology today for the sand bases and everything. Yeah. George was an innovator.
Oh, yeah, but what an incredible part of Kansas City sports history. With him involved the stadium,
Super
the Chiefs,
Bowls.
the Royals, and the Super Bowls, and the painted feet end zones. Absolutely stunning.
And like you said, they didn't have the drainage systems in, so that caused some problems. Occasionally, when the Spurs played there, they had to postpone a couple of their games because of a threat of rain.
Oh.
Because not because it was raining, because they could have played in the rain, but it would have trashed the ball diamond, and the Royals had a game the next night. So there was a couple of Spurs games, I believe, in 1969 that got rescheduled because of that, because they didn't want to trash the field and not be able to play the Royals game the next night.
Yeah, the pea gravel and sand bases they use today weren't developed for years to come, but it's amazing what he was able to do with the technology available to him back then. And Finley, George came to a baseball historical society meeting, and we asked a number of questions of him, and we had him, and I asked him the question. I said, who did you really like working for? And he said, this is going to surprise some people. He said the best person I ever worked for was Charlie Finley. He preferred Charlie a little bit to Ewing. Charlie tried to get him to go to Oakland, because in Oakland they sit low to the sea base out there, and that field gets wet, and of course the Raiders used to hose it down so the Chiefs couldn't play on it very well, and the Royals couldn't. The A's would do the same thing, and George said, I would go out to Oakland. I did some favors for Charlie, but I was not going to move there. I was raising my family here, But he said, I liked working for Charlie better because he took care of because he gave me a lot more freedom to do, and he took care of that kind of stuff. And then when George's son was born, Charlie sent him a check for like $2,000 and called him up and said, congratulations, here's $2,000 so that you can raise your son to not have to be you. Charlie had to stick the needle to him,
Wow.
so your son can get more education. I'm paraphrasing, but Charlie teased him and stick the needle to him. But they got along really well, and George, whenever he needed a favor, George would go out and do it for him in Oakland or wherever. And not that he didn't like Mr. K, but I found that to be, considering the vitriol we sometimes as Kansas Cityans espouse for the A's departure, there were a lot of people who really adored Charlie and thought he had a warm heart in many regards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to hear some of the inner stories like that.
And also talking about the field, a bygone tradition, which you never see today, when Royals games or A's games ended, I don't know if the A's did it, I know the Royals did because I got to do it, was when the game was over, that you would be allowed to exit the stadium via the field. And you could walk along the warning track. We usually were on the third base side and would walk down toward the left field corner and then exit through the big gate in the outfield wall. And they used to do that at Yankee Stadium back in the day too, and that was that just blew my mind. And I remember how crusty the warning track felt compared to regular dirt, and that
they have like cinders in it.
Yeah, and little rocks and stuff in it, and you'd walk right over the left field bullpen because they were right there on the field at the old ballpark, and just walk through the outfield and head to your car.
And the bullpens were funny too because they had phone lines that went from the dugouts to the bullpens. And that reminds me of a story I read in one of the Finley books. I guess I want to say it was Mo Drabowski had been traded away, and he might have been with Baltimore at the time, but he knew the number to the A's bullpen. And so he was down in the other bullpen, and he started calling the A's bullpen, and he could impersonate. I think it was Alvin Dark he was impersonating, and he would call down there and he'd go, "Get so and so up, warm him up." And so Alvin Dark was apoplectic. He's like, he'd pick up the phone. "Why is so and so up in the bullpen? You told us to get him up." 10 minutes later, Mo would go, "Get so and so up in the bullpen."
That's great.
Well, and Municipal Stadium also had those little dugouts in the bullpens, which is another bygone thing. Tiger Stadium had them.
Right.
They were like little bunkers almost, where you'd be, But most of the time in the summer, the players would sit outside in folding chairs because it was so hot down there.
Yeah.
Right.
But I always thought those were cool. It was like a little bunker, foxhole kind of thing.
Yeah, because it was screened in, so you wouldn't get hit by line drives down the
I thought,
line.
man, that'd be cool to watch a game from there.
There's even a compressed air device that blew dirt off home plate. So another unique feature.
Yeah, and I don't know that the umpires. I think the first time it shot air out, one of the umpires jumped about 2 feet in the air because it sounded like an air rifle or something going off. But he was an innovator. I mean, it was. I saw Charlie O on the Johnny Carson show. They rerun those on Antenna TV these days, and he brought orange baseballs to Johnny. And he had orange baseballs, purple bats, multicolored bases. The uniforms were wonderful, and that ballpark was just very colorful. And then because he was not well liked when he left town, Ewing Kauffman made everything a lot more Dodger blue and conservative. He did not want to be perceived as that. And at Municipal Stadium, the only trim you saw was like the blue around home plate that they put in the blue on deck circles, which were Royals colors. But there were no sheep, no pink foul poles. They left the seats. I don't think they wanted to spend any more money on that stuff, but they made everything, they trim it in royal blue, but they kept it very conservative. It was amazing the different. We don't want to be associated with that. Right. I'm Ewing Kauffman. I have a different personality style.
Yeah, you can tell the difference if you look at color photographs from the A's era to the Royals era.
Right.
It's very subtle at times, but you can definitely tell the difference. And another thing, when the A's during the A's days on the George Tomah would paint the team logos kind of a little just in white chalk of the visiting team in the on-deck circles.
Right.
I've seen a few of those.
And at KC and ours, I've seen in a couple of those. Yeah.
Just those little subtle, little fun
Unique
extra
things,
touches.
yeah.
And the Chiefs, the one thing I think a lot of us have agreed upon, on the Chiefs side is he did the gold end zones and the opposing helmets at midfield.
I would love to see that again. I thought that
Yeah.
was so cool.
Really so unique at the time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of extra effort, and then of course they'd get trashed when it'd be a rainy, muddy game, but they'd be fine until kickoff, and then it's a murky mess. But yeah, I thought that's. I was always drawn to that anyway, and of course the Super Bowl, it was like a work of art, And
Well, most Chiefs home games looked like a Super Bowl because of the work he put into it, I thought.
Right, yeah. Incredible field.
And so a lot of us have been like, we would love to see the Chiefs bring back gold end zones, even if you don't do the opposing helmets at midfield. But would love to see the gold. It would just be a really, the Chiefs did red end zones for a while, which was nice. Mm-hmm. And now they just put the logo on green, and it just doesn't pop.
Not the same thing, no.
And Arrowhead's a beautiful stadium.
And if you'd noticed too, during the we'll probably get to this here in a little bit, the Christmas Day playoff game with the Dolphins, the hash marks were alternately red and orange along the sidelines for the Dolphins and the Chiefs. He actually went through and painted the hash marks on the sidelines in different colors.
Wow.
And who else would even think to do that?
Yeah.
And he was the one that came up with the little arrows to go next to the numbers on the field. They're called television arrows now, I believe. Mm-hmm. I think that was his innovation. When I think they started doing that when they went to Arrowhead, and he would just put these little arrowheads. You're going this way, for the left or right, and that became standard practice eventually on all
To
fields.
show the nearest end zone, so that if you got lost, you couldn't tell where the camera was on the field.
Exactly.
You knew how much further you had to go. Mm-hmm. Then on September 17th, 1964, Charlie Finley paid a then record $150,000 for the Beatles to perform in concert for 30 minutes at Municipal Stadium.
And the Beatles were supposed to be off that day. That's what took
That
such
was
big
their
money. Right?
one day off, but I think they were rewarded later on with a nice little weekend in the Ozarks.
Because they didn't stand out like a sore thumb down there, did they?
Well, George Harrison's sister lives in Missouri. And I think she was a part of that at the time too. But they had like a little getaway where it was like a hideaway where nobody could find them. And so I think that was part of the deal too, that they were kind of, it was like a little carrot that Finley dangled at them. But can you imagine what? And the sad part was the stadium wasn't even full that night.
Yeah, amazing. Something as big as that.
What did they do? I think they had a trailer with a stage that they wheeled out there behind second base.
More or less, yeah.
More or less. And then, like I said, when we went out there, Jeff Logan, he goes, right about there where that storm drain is now. Can you imagine the Beatles on that trailer?
And the photos from that concert, particularly of them on stage, are pretty easy to tell apart from other Beatles concerts at the time, because there was this like gold curtain in the background that I'm sure Charlie Finley put up, so that you don't see on the other at other venues with their shows. So theirs kind of stood out a little bit. But of course, they played the song "Kansas City." They had to, which is
requisite.
Well, and I think they played it quite a bit anyway on some of their shows. But it was not the sellout, pandemonium that it was at a lot of other,
like Shea Stadium.
And other places. Of course, this was a new phenomenon. Any rock concerts in stadiums, so the sound was pretty primitive. If you could even hear anything, you were probably lucky, especially from the upper deck, because concert sound, had never been done before. So the amplification and so forth, it was just all trial and error basically. And I'm sure those speakers they had just weren't adequate. So even if you did try to record the show, you probably wouldn't have gotten much.
Well, and the funny thing is, concerts and stadiums briefly stopped in Kansas City because they let Three Dog Night play Royal Stadium the first year, and everybody got high and was diving onto the screen behind home plate, and they were, people were like jumping up on it and trying to climb it and falling onto it, and they tore up Royal Stadium. Was either bad, it might have been Bad Company, but somebody played there that first year, and Ewan Kaufman said no more. And they stopped that, and then Arrowhead finally became a destination, and then Michael Jackson brought Thriller to Arrowhead.
It alternated. They would sometimes do stadium concerts in the baseball stadium and sometimes at Arrowhead for about 5 or 6 years. But it seems like every time they staged one at Royal Stadium, it stormed. And it just rained the whole,
Right.
especially when Chicago come to town.
Well, like when Michael Jackson brought his tour in the 80s, at that time the security forces, you had companies that would come and do stadium security, and it became a whole different deal. It really became a production, and they made sure that everything was cared for in a way that in the 70s was like, we'll just make sure we have some police presence and we'll serve concessions and everyone will behave themselves. Well, yeah, that worked out really well.
Yeah. Well, in the summer of '67, Jackson County voters approved a $43 million bond issue for a new sports complex, which would have been for the A's and the Chiefs. But after the '67 season, Charlie Finley moved the A's to Oakland.
Charlie Finley paid a little over $4 million for 100% of the franchise in 1960 when he finally bought out the other owners who weren't part of the Arnold Johnson estate. What happened was, I want to say it was either Arco, Atlantic Richfield Company, or Unical 76, one of those names in oil and gas that's not there anymore, paid $5 million for the broadcast rights to Finley for an Oakland A's franchise. Here in Kansas City, he was getting a few $100,000. So if you're Charlie Finley, he was actually going before the city council and having statistics made up as to why Oakland was better than Kansas City and going in front of the American League because he knew he could recoup his entire down payment, his entire investment in the team in this one sponsorship deal via the move. It was a short-term cash grab, and as we all know, when he moved out there, he hardly ever drew 1 million people. It was a very regrettable move for him. But he took a big payday in the short term. And it was a brand new, before they enclosed the Coliseum, when it was brand new, it was a beautiful, 3/4 enclosed concrete bowl. There's no doubt about it. The neighborhood around that's gone way downhill. Don't go over the Hegenberger Bridge and get lost, by the way. But at the time, he thought it was the right thing to do. What he ended up saying have you ever seen the USA Today article from 1985 that he did 10 years before his death? They asked Charlie, they said, what's your biggest regret? And he told the USA Today reporter, my biggest regret is leaving Kansas City.
Wow.
And because he never could, Oakland never showed the interest in the team that Kansas City did. And he realized he made, and the funny part was I was at the first game he came back in April of '73. The first A's game was the 4th game ever played at Royal Stadium. And the A's had just won the World Series, and he had to walk in and see what would have been his. And think of how beautiful Royal Stadium was when it opened.
Yeah.
And, of course, Jack Layton, the PA guy, in the middle of the game, said, and ladies and gentlemen, tonight we'd like to welcome the owner of the Oakland Athletics, Charles O. Finley. And he stood up from behind the dugout on the third base side and tipped his houndstooth hat, and everyone booed the bejesus out of him. and I'd forgotten, I was, when I was getting ready to turn 9, I'm like, why do they hate him so much? Because it had been 6 years since I was 3 when I went to my first day and only A's game. And I said, well, because he took the A's out of Kansas City and moved him. They all hate him here. And it's amazing what could have been his. He just did not have any patience at that point.
And at that time, I didn't really know who Charlie Finley was. I was 9 as well, and I thought, because when I first started getting into the Royals, I thought the Royals had always been here. I didn't realize they'd only been around 4 years. It took me a little while to learn the history.
Yeah, me too.
And I didn't understand. And Oakland was always the hated team, both because of the A's and the Raiders.
Yeah.
It's like you had this double whammy, and
Yeah.
I just assumed they'd always been in Oakland, and they were us. We, that I was.
And if you
confused
tell a
about
kid
for
that
years.
today, they think you're trying to pull one over on them.
And that had to have been weird those first few times the Royals and A's played when they came back here. That had to have been very.
That was
very
open,
strange.
I think, in '69 or in either '69 or '70. The opening day game was the A's
70.
and the
It
Royals.
was
70.
the second one, yeah.
Well, the Municipal Stadium was home of the Chiefs from '63 to '71. The gridiron extended over the baseball diamond into right center field, and portable bleachers were placed in left field. The Chiefs' last ever home game at Municipal Stadium was played on Christmas Day, 1971. A double overtime contest against the Miami Dolphins remains the longest game in NFL history.
And can you believe that there is no video tape of the entire game?
That's incredible.
To me,
There
everyone
are
talks
bits
about
and pieces, but
bits
not the
and pieces.
whole game.
But they talk about how the Colts and the Giants in '58 was the best football game, or this, that, and the other. This was an instant classic, and they used to bulk erase the tapes back in those days and reuse them. And I just cannot believe that NBC in New York let that tape slip through their fingers. Mm-hmm. I know there was no ESPN Classic or anything at the time. It just boggles my mind to this day.
They just didn't deem it to be that important back then. And at that time, too, I think videotape was pretty pricey, which is part of the motivation for erasing it and using it for something else. What I always found interesting with the Chiefs playing at the stadium was the home opener would always be in October, because the Royals or the A's were still using the ball diamond, which meant that they couldn't use the Wolfpack bleachers. Mm-hmm. So the home opener was always like October 1st, October 8th, except for 1968 when we had no baseball here, and that was the one and only time they played a regular season game in September, and that was against Joe Willie Namath and the New York Jets, which was the Jets won that game, and that was the year, of course, they went on to win the Super Bowl, and that was a pretty big deal at the time when any time Namath came to town was a big deal anyway, because he was like the Mick Jagger of the AFL, and so whenever the Chiefs would play preseason games in August and early September at the ballpark, but they would not have the bleachers.
You just see cars parked out on the warning track.
Right, the ambulance and whatever. And of course, there was one fairly famous. The first Monday night football game, preseason game, was broadcast from Municipal Stadium with no Wolfpack bleachers and Joe Namath on the sideline in crutches, because and that's all ABC could focus on all night was him. Hey,
Joe Willie, when will you be back?
Exactly, and that was Frank Gifford's debut.
Let
me take that back. That was not the first preseason Monday night game. It was Frank Gifford's first game.
Because Keith Jackson had done the first year.
Right, Keith Jackson, yeah. And that was the first national, I believe, first football primetime game. It had to have been the first primetime game for Municipal.
And if anyone wants to see that, there's bits and pieces of that on YouTube that you can watch. So
yeah, ABC was a lot better at keeping their video from back then. And I'm hoping a video will resurface someday of the lone Monday night regular season game at Municipal in '71 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because it was a blowout. It was like 38-10. The Chiefs just killed them that night. But this was the mighty Steelers of the '70s in the larval stage.
Terry Bradshaw was the quarterback, but he had not ascended to what he would be in the coming years.
I mean, this was the year that they had the big draft, or like this is when Chuck Noll was really starting to form that team. Mm-hmm. So you had Mean Joe, and you had L.C. Greenwood and Jack Ham and Jack Lambert. They were on that team, but they just weren't gelling yet. And I don't think they didn't have Franco yet. He came along the next year. And but it would have been neat to watch the team struggle a little bit in their larval stage, and of course the Chiefs were at the top of their game at that point. And I've only seen just the NFL Films highlights from that one because it was blacked out locally. It was those archaic NFL blackout rules. Even if the game was sold out, you still couldn't air it on local TV.
Amazing, yeah.
And think of the fans that cost you in terms of and the discontent of NFL fans is like, well, I can't buy a seat, So they're fortunately modern times, and you've got the internet era, and people can buy NFL Sunday ticket and stuff. They're starting to get rid of that. But back then, I remember going, even when games were sold out and you couldn't watch them locally. My dad would load us in the car. Now my grandmother lived in Sedalia. We'd go down and visit her, and she was sick at the time and struggling, fighting through some issues with cancer, etc. So we were going to go down there anyway. We'd go down to visit her, and that's how you could watch the Chiefs.
That was common practice. People would, all you had to do was get out a 75-mile radius of Kansas City. Wichita had the games, or Omaha, or whoever, or Jeff City. Yeah. So you could circumvent that by going out of town and renting a hotel room for the day if you wanted to, I guess, or go see relatives and do it that way. And even the playoff game, the Miami game, was not. They didn't.
No, they didn't.
They aired it on tape delay at 10:30 that night after the local news. And of course, it was on Christmas anyway. And my folks let me stay up to watch it, and I lasted maybe 10 minutes before I fell asleep.
Well, and I remember we had Christmas at my uncle's that night, and the first game, the afternoon game, was on TV, and we watched it. And then he had one of those old AM box radios in his living room, and by the Christmas tree. And as the game got later on, as kids are playing, we're running around. As the game got later on, everybody started moving into that front room, and we went in there and listened to the play-by-play. And then when the winning field goal was kicked, the air just came out of the room. Yeah. And I remember, everybody talking about this is the last football game. And they thought it would be and they hadn't, and because of the construction strike not really having produced the effects yet, they weren't sure, but everyone thought at that point it would be the last sporting event played in Municipal Stadium. So I talked Dad into driving me down I-70 that night and taking me past the stadium, and they had just the old arc lights on, and you could see people going around cleaning the upper deck, and it was like a ghost ship. Wow. And it was a vision that just set in my mind of there it was, last time you're going to see it lit up like that for an event, not knowing that the Royals would play one more season there.
Yeah, we had the stay of execution there because of the delay, because they could have started the 72 season, or they could have played part of the 72 season at Royal Stadium, but Ewing Kauffman didn't want to. He didn't want to play in an unfinished stadium, and obviously it wasn't going to be ready for opening day. But he just said, let's just go ahead and play one more season at the old ballpark, and even then, Royal Stadium was still not quite finished when it did open because the water fountains weren't operable
They weren't
yet.
completely on. They didn't, and there was still a lot of exposed cement that hadn't been padded or done yet.
Yeah, and they hadn't painted everything yet. So, but it was fully functional. Otherwise, and it was cold.
They played the Texas Rangers, 38, 40 degrees outside.
39 degrees at game time, and we were in section 339, and I have never been that cold at a sporting event ever. You're not even a Chiefs game.
That happened to me on opening night a few years later. The Toronto Blue Jays come in. Now, in the afternoon, it's 80 degrees, and then the wind starts blowing out of the north at about 30 miles an hour, and it got down to freezing at game time. We took a 10-0 lead by the end of the third. My dad said, "Peace out, we're gone."
Well, and it was deja vu all over again when Kauffman Stadium, Royal Stadium opened. It had snowed the night before, just like it did for the 1955 game at Municipal.
That's interesting.
Another thing, you mentioned the lights at the old ballpark. That was one of my favorite features, particularly the outfield towers. They call the toothbrush style.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
PNC Park in Pittsburgh has them.
I'm looking forward to that, by the way.
And I remember every time we would head downtown and around the corner on I-70 there at 18th Street, I was always strained to see.
Me too.
It's still there. That was it was always your first glimpse of the ballpark coming around the bend there.
And the reddish orange, steel beams and the overhang, and it was just that one thing as a kid.
Yeah, you see it driving by.
Because as a kid you don't know street names. You're on I-70 after that, you don't know street names or whatever. But man, you saw at Stadium, you were level set.
And you got a real good. It was neat to drive by like during the day when there'd be a game going on, and view it from I-70. And you could see the place was about half full or whatever.
Right.
Just like today with Kauffman Stadium, it's the same thing. Really, it's still the same effect.
Do you still look there every time you go past?
Oh yeah,
I do too. There's a neighborhood there, and I still look there like I'm going to see something.
Because it was real dominant on the it was kind of on the hill there, facing I-70 to the south.
The funny part was if you'd go by at night and all the lights were off, you'd see this giant. It was almost like, when you look into space and you see a black hole with no stars around it. It was like a void because it blocked out all the neighborhood lighting behind it.
Right.
So you'd see this giant silhouette in the towers as a silhouette, and it was pitch black, and then you would see street lights and neighborhood around.
Yeah, they didn't really have any security lights like even today. I drove by Kauffman a while back, and it was like a big void. Because Arrowhead, they have those red lights around the exterior now, which is a nice touch. Surprised they haven't done that at Kauffman.
Well, and then a friend of mine I went to high school with, his dad his grandfather worked as a security guard at Municipal Stadium for a while, even after they closed it. And I'm like, how do you keep something secure that was pitch black?
Yeah. And getting back to the Dolphins game, it was record warm temperature that day. It was like 60 degrees out on Christmas Day. So I alternately was listening to the radio in the house listening to the game, and then I went out in the yard and played around with my new football for a while and kicked it around, and I had a new Chiefs helmet too, which I was real proud of.
I got one of those the following. I still got it.
I still have it too, and so it was kind of surreal because it was like springtime, and I remember Tom Hedrick, the Chiefs announcer, or was it Dick Carlson at that point?
I think it was Tom Hedrick at that point.
Okay. Well, anyway, whoever it was, the name Jim Otis kept coming up because he was the rookie running back for the Chiefs at the time, and I just kept associating his name with that game for some reason because he had a couple of big plays, even though Ed Podolak was the star of the game.
That's the name I remember. Yeah.
And I got confused because he kept saying Otis, and I thought he was talking about Otis Taylor. And it's like, okay, gave me a complex.
Yeah. And for another year or two, you'd have been going Amos Otis, Otis Taylor.
Yeah. Oh yes.
The stadium was demolished in 1976, the end of Municipal Stadium.
And Brian's posted some wonderful pictures.
Those were I stumbled across those one July, and it was like Christmas in July. The demolition photos. Well, they didn't know what to do with the place after the Royals and Chiefs moved out. What do you do with an old ballpark? It's too expensive to maintain. And at that time you didn't have like these little minor league teams that could have come in and played there or something, like say like the T-Bones or whatever. That was not prevalent back in those days, so it was like
not safe probably too.
And the neighborhood had deteriorated quite a bit, and there was talk of an industrial park and there was a lot of talk, I think, more than anything.
Well, I think it was going to cost $1 million plus to tear it down, and they were trying to figure out if they could get an industrial park or a housing development to come in there and help defray that cost. Because it's not just a matter of we're going to wheel in some Bobcats and take this down. It costs big money to take one down.
And there was a wonderful photo that they put in the paper a couple years after it closed. It was in 1974 or so, that showed how the ball diamond had
overgrown.
It was like 4 foot tall, the weeds and stuff, but you could still see the silhouette of the infield dirt.
Because the weeds from the infield were a much darker brown than the wheat-colored outfield weeds. I kept that picture for like 30 years. Wow. And I finally had to get rid of it because it turned so yellow and was starting to come apart. But I kept that photo for years because it talked about the birds that nested there, the rusting girders, and the overgrown field. And because the photo was taken from behind second base, and the weeds came up pretty much to camera height.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I've seen a similar one for Shibe Park in Philadelphia with Antonio Taylor, who used to play second base for the Phillies, standing where second base used to be with all these weeds around him. Yep. And but I have to tell the story now about the seats. When they started tearing down the stadium in the spring of '76, one of the rare times that my father ever showed any larceny, he and I went down on a Saturday morning, drove down to the ballpark to get some seats. And most demolition sites today, in fact, all demolition sites today, you're going to have a fence around the perimeter and some sort of security. They didn't do that back then. I mean, we were able to, because we'd heard about some other people getting into the park, and apparently they didn't care. So we managed to sneak in through this. There was this chain link fence, and there was an opening on near one of the outer gates, because the stadium used to have that big outer wall around it on Brooklyn Avenue, and then behind the left field wall too. And then there was the gate, the entry gate with the turnstiles and so forth. We somehow we had to pry the fence out to where we could crawl in through there, and Dad brought his tools with him. And we got into the park. There was nobody else around. There was no security guard or anything. And we got up into the third base grandstand, and of course they'd already torn part of the upper deck off, so you couldn't access that. That was another feature I loved about that park, by the way, the ramps leading to the upper deck.
If you had vertigo, that was not a thing to do.
They were like gangplanks, and Detroit's Tiger Stadium had them too. And I just love that.
Stadium,
and you'd walk. There'd be a chain link fence on either side of it, and this concrete ramp. And you're looking down on all the people in the lower level.
Oh, wow.
And another thing, too, I remember my brother and I went to a game once.
Did you get any seats? That's what my question.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
And also, my brother and I, we were at a game once, and and we were on the first base side, kind of in the back of the lower level, and we were looking at all of the press boxes and the catwalk behind them, and we were thinking, man, I wonder if we could sneak in there and watch the game from one of those boxes down the first base line that they didn't use for baseball. You know, they were just basically for the Chiefs, I think. But anyway, we got in there. Dad brought his hacksaw, and we found 3 seats. We managed to. They were kind of difficult to extricate from the concrete because they were mounted. They had the two posts that were mounted into the floor of the stadium, the concrete. But he managed to get them out of there somehow.
Sheer will.
And getting him back through that chain link fence thing out to head out was kind of an issue because I wasn't very big at the time. I was only like 11. And we somehow managed to wedge them into the trunk of our 68 Mustang. And
that's memories right there.
It was, and I wish we'd taken the freaking camera. I'm so upset we didn't think to take the camera with us. Of course, Dad was real conservative. He didn't want to waste film, and we didn't have digital cameras then, of course. But
do you still have those scenes?
Well, that's the other part of the story. So anyway, we and I think when we were there, a couple other people showed up, basically with the same idea we had of taking something, and got to roam around on the field a little bit. I remember walking over toward. We got over toward the first base dugout, and I could see it was like full of water down underneath the tunnel leading up to the clubhouses and so forth. And the scoreboard was still there, and most of the outfield wall was still there. In fact, the area where we entered was right next to the 369 sign in the left field corner. In fact, that was the one time we ever parked in Sam's parking lot.
And you didn't get
and it was
charged.
Free. Yeah. So anyway, we get the seats home, and my mom, for some reason, didn't want them in the house.
Oh.
And it's like, and so we ended up putting them out in our backyard underneath the tree, the big shade tree back there. And I'm kicking myself to this day for not putting them back in the house and repainting them and preserving them, because they ended up sitting out there and rotten after about 30 years. We ended up throwing them away eventually. But they were fun to sit around in and read, and I'd sit under the tree and read a book or listen to music or something. I'd take my little tape recorder out there and listen to music and under the shade tree.
You got to enjoy them for quite a few years, though.
Yeah. And they were even part of my miniature golf course that I had in my backyard. That was one of you had to do your tee shot from off one of the seats.
I finally got rid of, I gave it away. Maybe my father-in-law took it. I finally got rid of my seat from Arlington Stadium in Texas, where the Rangers used to play, where I'd snuck in. And when Christy and I were down there, we went down for our 5th wedding anniversary in 1994. And we were going to the ballpark in Arlington, and we drove by, and Arlington Stadium still stood, and they had built this giant thing that looked like that movie where Richard Dreyfuss built the mashed potato mountain. Close Encounters, so the third kind. They'd taken everything they wanted out of that field and then built this giant mound of dirt in the middle. Everything was smashed, broken, and I found the seat, and part of one leg was off, and I brought it home, and I kept it up until a few months ago as I was packing stuff for my move and got rid of it. But and part of that led back to Municipal Stadium, because in November of '75 I'd just gotten a new camera. I said, Dad, can you drive me by the stadium? I want some pictures. I don't know about going down that part of town. And he said, well, we're not getting out of the car. All right. So we drove by the stadium, and as we come, we went behind the home plate area. We kind of drove all the way around it as best we could. Behind the home plate area, someone had pried open one of those steel delivery doors, or the doors to the turnstiles. So, and you could tell it had been crowbarred or whatever. And as we come around and we turn on Brooklyn, I snap the picture where it says Kansas City Municipal Stadium. And then as you drive down past the light towers, you can see into the upper deck. Well, here were all the neighborhood kids. They'd gone into the upper deck, and with their bare hands, these are kids who were your age, 11, 12 years old at the time, with their bare hands, they don't have a hacksaw. They're trying to pull the seats out of the upper deck. They want to take something home. They just don't have the appropriate toolage to do it. Dad's like, look at that. They're up there with their bare hands trying to get seats. I'm like, I'd like to have a seat. But obviously, we're not stopping going to the chain link fence and going in.
That's the funny part too. We weren't even concerned about the neighborhood at the time. We got in and out without any.
Well,
issue.
my dad worked in insurance like you, Matt. So everything was like, I've read the case files. You don't want to do this.
That was another thing too. I wanted to mention when they did the retrofit in 1954-55, the main front entrance remained intact from the original stadium, where it said Kansas City Municipal Stadium on it, where the main turnstiles were, and there was like a little office upstairs. That remained throughout, and that was kind of like the home base of the stadium. That was the main entrance instead of behind home plate like most ballparks are. This was on the right field corner, and that remained intact the whole time. And the other thing too, one thing that always frustrated me about the stadium was the name. Municipal Stadium. Couldn't they have come up with something a little more creative? Because we already had Municipal Auditorium, Municipal Airport,
Cleveland Municipal Stadium.
And,
right, exactly.
and when you do now when you do a Google search, you'll get all kinds of municipal stadiums.
Jacksonville.
Shea Stadium was actually Shea Municipal Stadium in New York. There's several others, minor league ballparks and so forth, that are called Municipal Stadium. So you'll never know what you're going to get when you try to Google search it.
Boring, yeah.
It's not like Shibe Park or something, which is a little more...
Or Connie Mack Stadium, which is very descriptive,
Yeah, a little more concise.
Well, thanks, Ed, Brian, today for the Kansas City Sports History podcast information. You have any closing remarks before we conclude today?
It's been interesting over the years. Like we were saying earlier, I still look at that site every time I drive by. It was the old ballpark community garden for years, and it was surrounded by high fencing, a small garden, and a lot of weeds.
And marijuana.
I didn't know that.
Sure looked like marijuana.
Well, take your word for it. And then, in the more recent years, a neighborhood has been built there. There's some nice homes. For me, it was cool, Matt, to kind of close the loop on it, to take my car and be able to turn and drive down streets that were once the outfield and the infield. And it's nice to see that it has been repurposed, that it's there, that there's a monument to it. I wish they would put something where... well, and here's the thing. In Pittsburgh, where Forbes Field was, there's a home plate buried in the building right at the spot.
Okay.
I wish they would do that.
That would be so cool. Yeah.
Here. The thing is, I wish they would mark where the bases and home plate were as best they could, so that you could connect a little bit more than just the monument where the offices used to be.
Yeah, that the home base, like I talked about, now is the site of a nice little memorial. On the corner, they've got the big plaque from that shows the stadium itself and a little list of the famous events there, and they've got
some player monuments.
Yeah, they got some monuments to some of the players, both the Chiefs, Monarchs, and Royals, A's, and it looks like there's only like 8 or 10 players honored there now, but it looked like they built it with expansion in mind.
I hope so.
And I'm hoping they will add some more people as they go along. And one other feature I wanted to mention, and it's still there. There's that kind of dip in the street there on 22nd Street where the sidewalk kind of dove down. That I just always remembered, and it's still kind of caved in a little bit there along 22nd Street, and you can still see it. And it's just right up the block from the little monument there. And I think it's great that they went to that kind of effort to recognize the place. And it would be cool if we could mark where the field was and so forth, because you can eyeball it and kind of sort of guess where it was. Although it's much harder to do because, like you said, the field was like 30 feet below street level. So any kind of marker you put there now is going to be
technically
raised up higher, but still, I think they've done a wonderful job cleaning that area up. I mean, it's a wonderful little subdivision, and not just on that particular corner, but the whole surrounding area is improving too, and that's great.
It is. The area is getting. You wish there'd been a recovery plan back then, but it just wasn't ready for it, and there wasn't the kind of vision. But it to people like us who barely got to experience it because we were so young. It meant a lot to us, and it probably is the reason we're sitting here today and involved in sports because of the A's, the Chiefs, the Royals, whatever. And so it's an anchor place. We always look at it when we go by. We're always drawn to it. Always will be. And the one thing I'm grateful for is that they did not move Arrowhead and the K when we voted on it. Because to me, no matter where I'm at the rest of my life, the Truman Sports Complex is also my anchor. and those sites are forever the lineage of Kansas City sports.
Yeah, I've always had mixed feelings about it. I hated the fact that we were leaving the park at 22nd and Brooklyn, but looking at what we got in return for it, I mean, you can't beat it.
Great, yeah. Great
I mean, I still consider Arrowhead and Kauffman Stadium the two coolest stadiums in America.
Right.
So it's a bit bittersweet, but
Right. That's where I feel.
But yeah, you always it's like you always remember your first love, and Municipal Stadium was my first ballpark, Major League ballpark, and it just seemed so gargantuan back then, even though it was a fairly small stadium. But to a 7-year-old kid, it's like
it's amazing. Yeah, incredible.
Incredible.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's Kansas City Sports History Podcast. That's it for today. This is your host, Matt Starr, signing off. So check back for more Kansas City sports history interviews and podcasts to come.